Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy brings back the notorious mascot from the PlayStation 1 era and remasters all three of his adventures into one collection for the modern era. The collection was carefully crafted by Vicarious Visions, whose mission was to bring back Naughty Dog's classics for the new generation to enjoy while still bringing back the old fans. Did they accomplish this? Yeah, I'd say that for the most part. Here's what I thought about my time playing the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy. The most important part of any platformer is the gameplay, and it can be the deciding factor whether the game is a hit or miss. And I'm happy to say that Crash feels very well for the most part. There are quite a few annoyances in terms of varying hitboxes on certain enemies that lead you guessing to how close you can get to them before you die, but other than that, the gameplay is really smooth. I don't know why Vicarious Visions couldn't hit a 60 frames per second in terms of performance since this is 2017 and all, but this doesn't impact the game in the slightest. Many fans were worried that the jumping wasn't true to the original, but that was later debunked to be an issue with Crash and his collision with the objects in the game instead, but seriously? What is up with that? I can't tell you how many times I've died like that speedrunning the high road.
Game over.
When playing the Insane Trilogy, the original game is the clear standout out of the three in terms of age, and it really just shows by how much slower Crash controls. It's still a fun game, but when matched up with 2 and 3, it doesn't compare in the slightest. It doesn't give you a greater impression than just good. Luckily, 2 and 3 are a lot more traditional in terms of platformers, and is a ton more faster, and I'd say even easier to some extent. And while the gameplay seems pretty bare bones in the original, 2 and 3 also shake things up with adding little mini-game levels and adding new abilities and mechanics that Crash can use, such as a slide jump. Let's talk about the graphics. Now, Vicarious Visions really did a complete overhaul with the series, and it is obviously the first change you're going to notice in the remaster, and Vicarious Visions really went for a more Pixar Saturday morning cartoon, which reminds me a lot of Ratchet & Clank that came out last year, and I really like the change if I'm being honest. The originals kind of had like a dark and fuzzy tone to it, but now playing Crash the way Vicarious visioned it, I like the change they went out for. I think the new change is more welcome to kids looking to get into the series, and I think it gives a charm that the originals didn't even have. Now let's talk about the characters. Cortex and Crash are the real standouts in terms of change, and they look great. Cortex has this look from the PS2 games, and Crash looks amazing. They both give off a sense of emotion that the originals never even could, even get close to. They've been selling Crash with the pun fur-K, and it is true actually. Crash is insanely furry, and he's never looked so good. They really did a great job with the graphics in that department. With the graphics getting a huge boost, it's nice to see the music get some love too. The musical scores have been brought back and given an HD rework, and just sounds like a modern game would today. The soundtrack has some changes, but they're very minimal and largely kept faithful to the original score. The Crash games would always have music that would get stuck in your head all day, and that's a very good thing. From the mellow tropical sounds of turtle woods to the roaring sounds that play when a boulder is right on your tail, the music stays fresh through the 4 to 5 hour campaigns. I will say though, whenever I would die or take my time on a certain level, the music would continue going on, which led to weird segments of gameplay where I'd be playing to a tone of a later section of that level. It's clear that it's just a simple track in the background playing on loop. This is present in the originals and still is a thing in the Insane Trilogy, sadly. Moving on from the music, the sound effects are great in the game. The Aku Aku music is now much more clear, and almost everything seems to be different, from Crash's spin to the sound of Crash playing with his yo-yo in the hub. If you're looking for a complex story with great characters, this honestly is not the game for you. As charming and dull as a character Crash is, there's nothing more to it really. The story is a typical save the world from a madman and is nothing more than explain the situation you are in and to give context to why you are doing what you are. Luckily, the game doesn't stand on its memorable characters and great writing, but more on its gameplay and level design, which leads me into one of the greatest aspects of the Crash games, the linear, well-crafted level design. Being very closed and linear, most of the game's 30 or so levels are well crafted and memorable. I can almost list off the name of every single level in Crash, and given the time, I could probably do the same for 2 and 3. This is also where I had some of my biggest gripes though. Crash 2 and 3 have many levels with similar themes and almost makes it impossible to address the level with something other than Snow Level 1 or Sewer Level 2. This is not necessarily a problem in terms of the overall collection, but given it was my first run at the series, it would have been nice to see some diversity in level design. I came to a conclusion that Crash Bandicoot acts as a platformer at its core, and only shaking things up once or twice throughout the game, and Crash 2, my personal favorite, adds in some much needed mechanics, adds in a bunch of varying locations such as winter and sewer levels, and is the most solid overall game. Warped acts as the stepchild of the series and adds in a ton of minigame-esque levels ranging from riding a motorcycle to flying a plane. These levels are fine as they are, but the stiff controls and boring gameplay really makes you wish they would have stuck with traditional platforming. Don't get me wrong, there was some fun to be had in a bunch of them, but when matched to the game's stellar boots on the ground platforming, it is no match at all. Warped also gives a sense of progression as you unlock new abilities and gadgets for later levels to use. Luckily, 2 and 3 let you pick what levels you want to play first on a floor, which was a weird annoyance that 1 had in terms of the overall flow. Overall, the level design complements the gameplay at its strongest points going for it. Going into this review, I have beaten the 3 games, platinumed 1, and I'm well on my way to platinuming 2 and Warped. I think this represents best how much fun I've been having with these games. The additions of death routes and gem paths really make a lot of these levels fresh for a second or third playthrough, and you are doing something wrong if you're not going for them. A lot of these paths open a good 1 to 2 minute segment that you didn't even know existed on some levels that you thought you conquered in and out. I must have spent over 12 hours or so platinuming Crash Bandicoot, and it was all a blast. All 3 games have incredibly fun gameplay, and make grinds such as finding every gem or get gold on a time trial much more fun and easier. I never felt as if I was burnt out, and if I was, I would simply switch to another game. Given the $40 MSRP price, many may think that you get what you pay for, but with Crash you get a ton more than that. I could see people spending 40 to 50 hours getting everything in each game, and if you're not that type of player, the collection will at least give you 15 to 18 hours to beat all 3 main games. Of course, you can't grade the trilogy off the games themselves, but more with what they add or change. Luckily, this is where Vicarious Visions did not drop the ball. Instead of drastically changing things in the games themselves, they went for a more quality of life improvement. When booting up a level, you can now find hints on how to acquire the gems in that certain level. This makes it a lot more easier for those crazy enough to 100% the level without a guide. This information was previously only found in manuals and magazines in the original, so it's nice to see that the game has a system in place for those confused and new to how Crash works. Crash Bandicoot is no longer as brutal as it was on the PlayStation 1, with an auto-saving system in place after each level you beat. Thank God for that. All 3 games now share the same controls and play similarly to each other, so no worries about jumping from game to game. Vicarious Visions was also kind enough to add a box counter, so simply press the inventory button and you know what you are working with, and it makes 100%ing the game a ton more easier. The time trials from Warped are also a thing for Crash 1 and 2. Ultimately, the Sane Trilogy just unifies the 3 games in a nice package, with only positive, minor changes to the games. So in the end, the Sane Trilogy is a great collection of Crash's 3 original adventures, and it's nice to see the arcade-like platformer return to us after 20 or so years of hiatus. The trilogy is often faithful with only minor changes, and with the $40 asking price and the slew of content in this, it's hard to go wrong here. The game is not perfect with some stupid design choices like the 30 FPS and the weird jumping collision found in 1, but the things they nailed in this remaster greatly outshadowed a few hiccups. After the Sane Trilogy, I think we owe it to Vicarious Visions to develop a new Crash game, and I look forward to the franchise's future. At the end of the day, I'd highly recommend the trilogy to diehard fans and newcomers waiting to get into the series. As always, I want to thank you a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.